Hi and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since I last posted a video, 6 months to be exact, but I did not abandon this channel. Life just got in the way. I did a lot of traveling during the second half of 2022, so when I was back home I had a lot of catching up to do at work, and it was very hectic, so I didn't have that much time to spend on anything else. So yeah, that's my excuse, and with that out of the way, I can tell you that I did do some reading here and there. I did manage to find some time, and my goal for 2022 was to read 20 books, and I managed to reach that. I actually read over 30 books, so I'm pleased with that. I know that that is like nothing compared to a lot of booktubers who read over 100 books. I even saw someone who had read over 190 books, which is amazing. But for me, this was my first year like seriously back into reading, so I'm very happy with reading over 30 books. And in my defense, a lot of the books were longer and like long, thick books. Like for example, I read 3 Harry Potter books in French, my third language. So that took up quite a lot of time. So that should count for something. So going into 2023, I have set the goal for myself to read 30 books. I know that it might sound low considering I did that in 2022, but I have bought a lot of long, thick books, and I have to take that into consideration when I set the goal. And I have to sort of rein in my expectations on the number of books that I will be able to read in 2023. So yeah, I want this video to be a sort of recap, wrap up of the books that I read since my last video. And since then I think I managed to read 11 books. So yeah, let's do a recap of those books so we can start fresh for 2023 in my next video. So like I said earlier, I read 3 Harry Potter books in French this year, and it's because years ago I made a project for myself to read all the Harry Potter books in French, my third language. I thought it would be a good exercise to improve my French, and now in June 2022 I finally finished that project. And most people know about Harry Potter, so I won't go into the details of the story. What I can say is that it was so good to finally accomplish this goal. It was something very time consuming, and I had to invest a lot of time in this. So yeah, getting to the finish line was really good. And it was also fun to relive my childhood and to read the same stuff that I read as a kid, but to see it with adult eyes and see how differently you view things. So next up are the 2 first novels written by Japanese author Haruki Murakami, and these were written in 1979 and 1980. And 2022 was the first year I ever read Murakami. I was very late to that, but I absolutely fell in love with his books, so I've sort of started reading through all his books, and will continue until I get bored, and that hasn't happened yet, so I'm continuing still. And so this one is the first one, and it doesn't have that much of a plot. It's basically about a young man who's in his hometown over the summer, home from college, and he's hanging out at a bar and having strange conversations. Maybe it doesn't sound like the most amazing book, but this was actually one of my top 3 books of 2022, so I thought it was absolutely amazing. And then after Hear the Wind Sing, he released Pinball 1973, and this one has more of a plot. It's about a man who's obsessed with finding a specific pinball machine from his childhood. And he's living in his apartment with 2 identical twin girls, and he's sort of reminiscing about his college days and the girlfriend that he had at the time. It's kind of strange and mysterious. If you read Murakami before, I think you know sort of the vibe of this book, and I enjoyed this one too, not as much as this one, but I did give it 3 stars, so a really good read. Okay, so next up is Money Shot by Christa Faust. Now this book I picked up for fun and for free at the library. They have a table at the exit of the library where you can take a book for free and you don't have to return it. And this one caught my eye for obvious reasons, and I thought it was like fun and kitsch, so yeah, I brought it home with me. So this one is a basic murder mystery, but it is set in the porn industry in LA. And if you're looking for like a murder mystery with an edge, set in a like unconventional environment, then maybe this book is for you. Otherwise, I would not recommend it. It was not very amazing, and yeah, it's not something I will be reading again. So on to bigger and better things. The next book I read was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And this is a classic, and I can totally see why. I absolutely loved it. And since it's a classic, I don't think I have to explain the plot. And I went into this having seen both movies, the one from the 70s with Robert Redford and the new one with Leonardo DiCaprio, but I still had a great time reading this. The writing is so good, so despite knowing the story, I had a great reading experience. So next up is The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye by David Lagercrantz, and it's the 5th book in the Millennium series. And for those of you who don't recognize it, it's the same series as The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Maybe you've seen either the American movies, the Swedish movies, or maybe even read one of the books. So first there were 3 books written by Stieg Larsson, and then he died, and the publisher decided to let this man, David Lagercrantz, to write 3 books to continue the story. And having now read 2 of those books, I think that they should have just left it. The 4th book was alright, it was a good thriller, but this one I'm not really seeing the point of. It really dragged on, and I was not excited at all. I really had to force myself to read it. And I'm someone who likes thrillers, so it should appeal to me, but yeah, it didn't. And I will continue the series and read the 6th and final book sometime. Not just yet, maybe I will save that for like 2025 or something. So next up is My Sister, My Love by Joyce Carol Oates, and this was my first time reading her, so I was very excited going into it. But this one I picked up at a used bookstore in Sweden, so it's in Swedish, which I think is a mistake because I did not enjoy the translation at all. There were things that really annoyed me, and I think it held me back from enjoying the story. But I do want to give Joyce Carol Oates a second chance, but then I will be picking up a book in English so that I get her original writing. But this book is inspired by real life events, but it is a fictional book. And it's about a family living in New Jersey. It's a mom, dad, a girl and a boy. And like the parents are obsessed with like the surface. They want other people to perceive them as rich, as successful, and that also applies to their children, who they want to be very successful in school and in sport, and they care much about like how people perceive them than actually being happy. And it turns out that the little girl, Bliss, is very talented at figure skating, and she becomes somewhat of a sensation. And then one morning, she's found murdered in their home. And we are being told the story from the perspective of the older brother. He's just a few years older than her. And it's basically the story from when he was born until his adulthood, and when he sort of tries to figure out what actually happened when his sister was murdered all those years ago. So the next book I read was A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn, and I picked this book out because I wanted a cozy mystery when I went on a cruise earlier this fall. And I found this one in a video by Books Lala, and she said that she usually doesn't like this type of book, but that she enjoyed this one. So I thought, why not? Let's give it a try. And this is part of a series, I should say as well. But I don't think that I will continue the series because I didn't love this book. I really thought I was going to like it. It's historical fiction, it's a murder mystery, and there's like a potential love story as well. But I thought that everything was a bit too surface level. I never really got to connect with the story or the characters or the environment. So I think I'm just going to leave it at the first book. So the story is basically a murder mystery set in the 1880s in England. And the main character is Veronica, who's a young woman and orphaned. And she's lived all her life with her aunts, and they are now dead. So she gets contacted by a baron who offers her help, but he pretty soon gets murdered. So Veronica teams up with one of his friends, Stoker, and they set off together to find out what happened, basically. So it's a really good story, but I just think that it wasn't executed very well, unfortunately. So next up is Still Life by Louise Penny, and this is a classic whodunit murder mystery. This one is set in Quebec, which was fun. It was the first time I read a book set in Quebec. The murder mystery itself, however, wasn't too exciting. It's an older woman found dead in the woods, and the police are trying to find out who in the village did it. And I was forced to learn too much about bows and arrows, and yeah, it didn't stand out to me. It was pretty fast-paced and the language was good, but I think there are more exciting murder mysteries out there. So next up is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, and this is a controversial modern classic. I do think that most people know about this book, but for those of you who don't know, it's about a man, Humpert Humpert, and he is sexually obsessed with nymphets, as he calls them, and they are pretty much prepubescent girls with a certain glow and beauty to them. And so he comes to America and he finds a room to rent in a house where such a girl lives, Lolita, and she's 12 and she lives in this house alone with her mother. And the story is basically about Humpert trying like whatever he can to get what he wants and the consequences of that. And the story is entirely told from the perspective of Humpert, so we are reading his internal process of justifying and minimizing his actions. So this book came out in 1959 and has been controversial ever since, which isn't surprising. It's a difficult subject to read about, and you have to be prepared to read about a subject that goes against most people's moral code, at least mine. But I do think that if you have looked into the book, is prepared and do want to read it, I think that you should. It's a well-written book, and the author makes a good job of bringing you into the head of the perpetrator, and you have to think for yourself in order to like rebut the justifications that he gives for his actions. So I do think that there is more depth and value to this book than just the shock value of the subject. Which, at least for me, justified reading this book. So next up is something much lighter and brighter. This is another one of my free library finds. It's Une affaire de cœur by Marie Collins, and this is a short, sweet little book. It's about two lawyers on opposite sides of a case and basically how they fall in love. And it takes place in Italy and in Paris, so it's very romantic. It's not a great book, but for something so short and sweet, I quite enjoyed reading it. So last but not least is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, and this one has been a long time coming for me. I first bought this book back in 2014, I think, when the TV series was premiering, so back in my university days. I did start reading it, and I got maybe until page 100, and then I pretty much stopped. Not because I hated it, but I just never continued. I also started watching the TV series and I didn't enjoy it, so I think that it didn't motivate me to keep reading the book. So it's been sitting in my library in my iPad ever since, and it's been bothering me that I have unfinished books there. So I decided that 2022 was the year and I was going to finish it. So now in December, during Christmas, I finally finished it, and I'm so happy that I did. So the story is about Claire, who is in Scotland on a second honeymoon after being reunited with her husband after the Second World War, and through witch magic she gets transported back to the 1740s in Scotland. And this is a very violent time with rivaling clans, and the English are also there. So she has to do her best to survive and try to get back to her own time. And this is proving difficult, so she gets more and more involved with the people who she meets back in the 1740s. And this is part of a long series, so if you're interested in time travel and that kind of stuff, there is a lot to read here. But I think that I will stop after this first book. So that wraps up 2022 for me, and I want to say thank you for watching my videos during the year, and I look forward to making more videos in 2023. So see you next time.